believe in God.
Every description of God that I've heard holds God to be all-powerful, very typical, and all good. And I see earthquakes and tornadoes and disease, childhood leukemia, and I see all of this and I say, I do not see evidence of both of those being true simultaneously. If there is a God, the God is either not all-powerful or not all good.
G'day and welcome to episode 14 of this live podcast. An atheist, a believer, and a pastor walk into a bar. We've got a
Hang on, which one am I?
So, well, I don't know. You tell me.
Might be the pastor.
We'll stick a label on you when we get there. Right now, we're live on YouTube and Facebook introducing our podcast. There was a little bit about this because he takes on the claim that there is a God made by millions of people in the world. I think it's interesting that he says every description he's heard. So he's going on what he's heard from Christians predominantly, I would imagine. And if that's what he heard, I think that he's saying it from an observer's perspective. He's 100% correct that God is either not all powerful or he's not all good. So we're going to take a little bit of a look at that in a minute before we get into the main topic for tonight, which is, can you perform good deeds without God? Second part of that, is the Bible a place to get your moral compass? Many Christians would say, no, you can't get them anywhere other than the Bible. G'day, I'm your host, Peter Rowe. I am a non-believer. I used to be, but after a long time, I decided I needed proof. I needed some verification of what I was being told was true. I got no answers. And so I left the church. Looking back, I cannot reconcile myself to who that person was, such as the clarity I now see things. Having said that, my left eye is blurry. It's okay. I've had my eyes tested. It's okay. I'm not one-eyed, literally. Well, I'm getting close. It's great to be back for another thought-provoking episode tonight. No exception. Rich is not with us tonight, nor is Suresh. But again, helping us out is another non-believer. Well, maybe Jason Jordan and a regular Christian co-host, Luke Feeney. Welcome, gents.
Greetings.
How are you, mate?
Greetings. This is a live broadcast. If you are watching on YouTube or Facebook on Wednesday, the 27th of March, 2024, 8 o'clock or just after Australian Western Standard Time. We are in beautiful sunny downtown Perth, the second most isolated city in the world, I do believe. 35 degrees today Celsius. It was lovely. So what does all this mean to you? Well, you can ask a question or make a comment for the next hour and a half. So please join in, be involved. We love hearing from you. I said last week that we were 4 Aussie blokes without even checking. Rude. So let's do that, gents. Are we Aussies or are we ring-ins? I know I am.
What, a ring-in?
No. No. I was born and bred in Perth, mate.
Right.
Yep.
Luke?
You too?
Yeah, me too. Yep. Born and bred in Perth.
Right.
Irish, way back.
Irish?
But, yeah, just with the Feeney last name.
Yeah, of course.
Of course, yeah.
It's not too common here, but pretty common over there.
Yeah.
So, what about yourself, Jason?
I'm an interloper, unfortunately. I came to Australia. Well, you can't call me a refugee, an immigrant. I came to Australia when I was 7 years old, and my genetics are 100% exclusively Welsh.
Have you checked that?
Oh, I've checked that on the Ancestry DNA. Yep.
Really?
Although, no, it goes like generation after generation is just Welsh, but then there was a little bit of interference from the Vikings.
Is there any part of the world the Vikings haven't been? There is connections with my family too. I also did the history, the heritage thing, and all my grandparents, as far as I'm aware, are Scottish or Australian. I found out I'm 23% Greek.
Oh,
yeah, I know. Go figure.
Nice.
Yeah, well, I think that's nice. I'll get there one day. So listening to what Neil deGrasse Tyson said, Luke, in your Christian circles, as it were, do most people say that God is all powerful or all good or both or neither?
Both. It's one of those things that that we would all really affirm. but often we won't wrestle with that problem of suffering that Neil deGrasse Tyson is talking about. And I have a real sympathy, a real empathy to what he is saying, where he's coming from. I don't necessarily agree where he's landed with it, but I think he's fairly on the money with bringing attention to that idea that something is amiss. For me personally, you got to look at a few different things around how do we define all powerful is probably a good one, but I think it's one of those things that would most certainly be affirmed in most of the circles that I run with, without digging in too deep as to the ramifications of what that means.
I think all powerful just simply means to us anyway. I think it's that God's capable of anything. So in doing that, of course, we don't then put limitations on. And I know we've talked about this a little bit with you before. That then, of course, opens the door to, well, you may as well just do what I want you to do and you fulfill all my needs. And if you don't, then clearly you're not powerful. And that's certainly what I learnt in church. And we've talked about that, and I understand now that that's a dangerous way to think, as it were. But when you're given a text which is confusing, we have to make up what it is we think it means. And that's not easy. It's never been easy. So, yeah, look, it's probably another good discussion for another time, but we have talked about it. So, yeah, I know it's a tricky one. Jace, what circle of friends do you move in? Do you have Christian friends? Are you a bunch of heathens or what?
Both. And I do have Christian friends that I have these sorts of discussions with all the time. Sorry?
Christian heathens.
Heathens. Yeah. Well, I mean, I do describe myself somewhat in a blasphemous way as a Christian who doesn't believe in the supernatural. And that's because I believe in all the values and the lessons and everything else. I think there's some great stuff to take away in our Western world that's taught and originated, well, you could say originated from the Bible. Probably didn't when we look at it really deeply, but a lot of the lessons that we take today are from there. But it was interesting when I heard Neil making that statement, because I'd heard a slightly different one. And I know it's a famous one. I can't remember who actually said it first, but is it possible? Could God create a rock heavy enough that even he couldn't pick it up?
Wow.
The paradox.
It is a paradox. It's a paradox wrapped in a riddle, surrounded by a conundrum. It's it really makes you think, doesn't it? And and it's those sorts of paradoxes that really sort of lead me towards questioning everything. And the big discussion I had with a Christian mate recently was, we were sitting outside looking at nature, sunset, and he was like, how on earth could this have happened? Like through nature, through just happening. And I'm like, I am very comfortable with the idea that it happened that way, rather than someone just magicking it into reality. The fact that I have learned enough about not only evolution, but about time to realize how mountains erode and how tectonic plates move and all of these things over billions of years evolve. And, you're talking about not just living creatures evolving, but land in effect, and oceans evolving as well, becoming something else, not necessarily better, but something different. So I think time is a concept that most people really don't have a strong grasp of. And when you try to think in terms of 1,000,000 years, that's an extraordinary amount of time when you think it's only 2,000 years since the story of Christ.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Correct. And one of the things, Jace, and this doesn't apply to Luke, because he's not a closed-minded man by any stretch of the imagination, but it's why so many Christians love fitting that concept into 6,000 years, because then they can make it make sense to them. How on earth anyone with a critical mind could possibly think that what's happened on the earth could happen in 6,000 years? If you look what's happened to the geometry and the standing of the earth in the time that we know, how could it possibly add 4,000 years onto that and everything's hunky dory? I mean, it's bizarre, but that's a way of justifying the 6,000-year-old Earth theory concept that a lot of Christians actually get into.
Yeah, which stems from feeling like they have to, based on a misunderstood approach to how to read the Bible, how to engage with the Bible, and what it's actually doing. Because they think, well, unfortunately, despite everything that I'm hearing and despite everything that I'm reading and seeing, this text here gives it a time frame of around 6,000 years from this story, and I have to read it in this certain way. So I then have to make everything else outside of it fit this, which really, when you think about it, it's a borderline impressive exercise in ridiculousness. Like you actually have to get unbelievably creative to try and we're not talking disputing one fringe paper that says, well, maybe the Earth's billions of years old. We're talking totally disproving everything, and having to come up with things like, well, yeah, when God put these dinosaur fossils in the ground, he made them look millions of years old for whatever reason. And you go, really, is this where we're at? Maybe that's just how old the Earth is, and you need to change how you're reading this story. That's one way to do it.
If you're a practicing Christian who genuinely believes in God, do you have to accept the Bible as being 100% literally the Word of God?
No. I can answer that for him.
No. You do not have to do that. I mean, even the whole idea of inerrancy, infallibility of the Bible is a very, very late development, really, in the grand scheme of things. And the literal reading, again, is quite a modern sort of thing. You look at all the early church fathers, and they would really, they wouldn't take things literally. Some of them they would, because they didn't really understand. They had no reason to dispute that the Earth was 6,000 years old. But now we do. You have to change how you're looking at it, which they did in many, many different aspects. And even it being the Word of God, you've got to think, well, what is that? I mean, I believe it's inspired. I believe there is something about it that teaches us something that moves the story forward. There's a lot of wisdom in it. It's showing how people have understood God to be, and there's a progression, and I love it. That's why I teach. There's a lot of beauty in it. But that doesn't mean that it fell out of the sky or that God kind of whispered down.
I mean, if you read the history about how the Bible was apparently assembled, which scriptures were going to go into there and which teachings were going to go into there, and the fact that they left some of the scriptures out of there because they didn't necessarily true up, and we've still got internal inconsistencies in there as well. Totally. And I recognize as well the fact that we've got an Old Testament and a New Testament, and that they are somewhat contradictory, and they're a very different type of God. This is why I really struggle with it, because I mean, I'm probably one of the few non-Christians who actually read the Bible. It was a slog. It was hard work. I had to force myself through it. It was worse than War and Peace. But I felt that I had to do it if I wanted to be able to have rational arguments with my irrational friends.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's refreshing to hear in itself, isn't it, Luke? Because people are very critical of something they've actually never involved themselves with, and I'm not encouraging people to necessarily read it, but if you're going to have an opinion or at least understand your argument or your debate, having said that, you must have been confused beyond belief reading it from a secular position to try and make some sense out of a book which even to Christians is confusing.
Especially that bit where someone begat someone, begat someone, begat someone, begat someone. It was a real lesson in history.
Yeah,
but the fascinating thing that I found from reading it was how much of the Bible reappears in our language as common sayings.
Yeah,
it surprised me about a rich man passing through the eye of a needle or something like that. So many of these stories and lines we just say without even thinking about it.
Oh, yeah. What I find interesting that you've said that both weeks that you consider yourself a Christian without the spirituality part of it, as it were. I want to ask you as we head into the main topic of tonight, which is where do we get our morals from? Because it's a big argument, discussion, and debate that's been going on forever. There are so many Christians who accuse us of not being able to have that. We should be out raping and killing because we have no moral, parameters, as it were. So, but what you've said interests me, and I'll be interested to see what Luke thinks about this too. From your perspective, you consider the Bible to be full of good stories, parables, things to learn from, etc., etc. I want to ask you, is there anything you've read in the Bible that you could not possibly have known or felt or done without reading that, as in a moral landscape that makes up Jason Jordan?
No, I mean, if anything, it surprised me with the level of violence and pornography that was in there. It was unpleasant. That was the only real way I could describe it. And I was a little frustrated in that the version that I chose to read, I understand to be the most authoritative version currently, which is the King James version. Yeah. Now, I've tried to look at other versions as well. I did once when I was staying in a motel and I got very bored. I did start reading the Good News Bible, which I really struggled with because that it interpreted the Bible in such a way that it was very childlike. And there might be some value in that, but I just found it enormously frustrating because it watered down any of the power that it actually has.
It's the Bible without the naughty bits.
Yes. Yeah. It had lovely cartoon pictures as well. Yeah. This particular one actually had people riding dinosaurs. That's why I picked it up and started reading it.
Well, I mean, the dinosaurs are pretty old, and you never know your luck. I'm just want to jump in. There's a couple of so Fenton has sent. I think that's a little hand clapping emoji on there. Are you able to bring up a bigger thing version of that, Luke? Oh, there we go. So he's clapping Fenton, I guess, clapping us being on
waving,
or whatever.
Waving, saying hi.
Wave. G'day, Fenton. How are you, mate? Lovely to have your company. And he's actually got a comment there. Now, I'm not even going to attempt that word because I've never heard of it.
Euthyphro.
No idea.
Yeah, Euthyphro.
Euthyphro dilemma. I wonder what that is. Fenton, can you clarify? And stop showing off with big words.
I think it's that's the paradox that Jace mentioned about the can God create a rock that's too big for him?
Okay, the euphoria. Okay, dilemma.
It's a thought exercise.
Yeah. And my brother, all the way from Albany, the Bible is a box. To find God, we need to think outside the box.
But that's actually one of the points, Greg, that I have always wondered about with the very idea of God, not so much religion or Christianity, but the concept of God, is that I can't see that if we were created by a God, that a God would have given us the level of intelligence and inquiry that we've got to then expect us to have blind faith. And if we don't have blind faith, to punish us. That seems like another paradox. Why would we be granted that level of ability to question things and then not be expected to question things?
Well, I think the key there is the key point there is what you finished up on, because none of that is a problem until you get to the punishment bit, right? And when you take away that punishment side, for me, if God actually created us, but yet we were not supposed to question, we were not allowed to question, we weren't supposed to really wrestle and think and have these types of discussions. I know there are many elements within the church that might take that perspective that is a lack of faith, but for me, I would say that that's actually a sign of a deeper faith, of a faith that is invested in actually wanting to seek the truth, that is recognizing the limits of understanding, recognizing the limits of all this sort of stuff, and really wrestling with that. I mean, in the Jewish tradition, that's very rich. There's lots of traditions where that's actually a cherished part of what it is to follow God. So, yeah, blind faith I wouldn't have thought is expected. True faith wouldn't be blind. Doesn't mean that you have all the answers, because then it's not faith. It's just you're picking the winner, right? There's something mysterious in it, but yeah, it's a really good point. I think we need to use our brains.
I think one day, and you may have this with Suresh, I'm not entirely sure, but one day it would be great to get somebody who is I use the word loosely, but a disciple of another religion, to have the conversation about the similarities between religions, especially when I start looking at some of the lessons. Even Buddhism has a lot of the very same kind of lessons and teachings, which makes me think that a lot of these are actually just based on natural principles in the first place. So,
absolutely.
when we start talking about morality, I don't think they're sourced from the Bible. I think that the Bible, or the people that wrote the parts of the Bible, got the lessons from natural principles and just codified them, which is great because somebody needed to do it. Instead, we got the Council of Nicaea who decided to do it.
Look, it's true. The stories go back to 5,000 years before Christ was even born. Great stories, of which often included so many hundreds of times that it would stun you to have a look at the list, Jace, about the amount of stories about virgin birth, crucifixion, raising from the dead, miracles, all of these things that parallel the life of Christ. And to me, it's just a bunch of great stories, as you say, with truths in them that have just gone on and on and on and passed through and through, which is why I find it frustrating that to me, if you're willing to go back and have a look at the stories, the similar stories to Christ's life, and see that there's not much uniqueness at all, to me, that's the end of the discussion right there. You look at that and go, well, then clearly it's not real because it's already been done before.
I watched a short documentary on YouTube, which is the best place to do research. But this particular documentary talked about a number of things to do with the Bible and how a lot of these stories, for example, the Great Flood, there's a lot of cultures and a lot of religions that actually have that as a part of their teachings as well. And that may well be because about 6,000 years ago, the Younger Dryas period, there was actually a massive flood. And we know, for example, that through the Mediterranean, the waters came rushing in from the Atlantic there, whoosh. And you can imagine if it was low-lying ground, that water would have come in at quite a pace. So you can understand why, the horror of something like that, washing towns and cities away, would resonate and would keep on resonating for generations. The other thing that I did want to mention, and I know this one's going to be a bit controversial because this one strikes at the very core of Christianity. And that was, they were talking about how when they found the Dead Sea Scrolls, there was a lot of parallels between what's in the Bible today and the scriptures that were actually found in that cave. So they were saying there's some veracity there, some ability to verify some of those passages, which is fantastic. But there was also some stuff that doesn't appear in the Bible. I think Thomas might be one of them. And there was, and there was another thing. This is where it gets interesting. So initially written in Hebrew, translated into Latin, into Oldie English, all these different sort of over time being translated by different people with different understandings. And there's possibly been a mistake in a particular translation. When you look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, you see the Hebrew word for virgin, and it doesn't mean what we consider a virgin to be. It's actually the word for unmarried woman.
Right.
Now, again, I don't know the truth of that, but it's always interesting to look at both sides of that and go, oh, well, actually, that sort of makes a little bit of sense. You know, if she got pregnant and,
which is why I find it so...
be very happy.
Which is why I love science.
I believe you.
At least you can prove it. So that's why I love science, because it's the debate the confusion, the contradiction, the hypocrisy, the whole thing. It does my head in. At the end of the day, you simply cannot boil it down to a simple fact about almost anything of it. It's so much hyperbole. It's
Pete,
just
I mean, you're probably a little like me, I would assume, in saying that, yes, there's big questions to be asked. A lot of it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. But if it makes somebody a better person, then all power to them. Go for it. Enjoy yourself. Knock yourself out. Don't force it on me. Don't force it on your family. If you want to have that private belief system and it makes you a better person, you become a better person as a result of it, then go for it. And I'm not going to criticize that. I'm not going to criticize anything about it. I want you to be a better person.
Yeah. See, for me, it's very, very simple because I don't need all of the stuff. I simply had an understanding that there was a God, and I felt like I was drawn to him. And there you go. That's all it needed to be. And I'll go back to the story again of my dad saying, don't worry about the scriptures, just it's about love. And he taught me just about love, about love, about love. And that's, I don't need to study the Bible. I don't need to be confused by it all and try and work out which is which and what's true and what isn't true. To me, it's just a complete and utter waste of time. You spend your whole life doing that and then wait till you die to find out whether any of it was actually true.
I know we touched on it a little bit last week.
Nice.
We were talking about the catastrophe that is teaching about evil to especially kids. Now, Mum, who watched it last week, is probably watching this week. She related a story to me about when she was a child growing up in North Wales. And as a child, there was no men in the family because they'd all gone for various reasons. But her auntie wouldn't keep mirrors in the house because keeping a mirror was a sign of vanity, and that's a sin. So you imagine what that does to kids. You imagine what it does to a young girl when she reaches the age of womanhood, and that happens for the first time, and there's no education. There's no. They are going to feel a whole stack of guilt, of horror. Have they been bad? Have they done something? Is this a punishment for something that they've done? With that lack of education and the morality police who were around at the time, those poor kids, it doesn't surprise me that they are tortured for life. I mean, mentally tortured for life after that.
Yeah, look, I think religion, by and large, and this is a sweeping statement, and people may say it's a generalization, but I think it's done more harm than good across the board. And there's not too many people, I think, that would disagree, even from a Christian perspective, to understand that. And it's hard to package it all up under one word of religion, but I just did. Let me just let's just go back and move on with what we're talking about. There's a couple of people who have said in some comments. So we're just going to talk about the main part of tonight's podcast again. The question tonight is, can you perform good deeds without God? Is the Bible a place to set your moral compass? So are we all born with morals? And if so, to what degree? They vary. Clearly, some people are void of any moral fiber. Psychopaths, for instance. I think it was renowned atheist Sam Harris who made a very interesting point recently about how psychopaths didn't choose to be psychopaths. They were most probably fairly normal, nice kids when they were little. So what happened? No one decides to become a psychopath, torturing and murdering innocent people for no apparent reason. You wouldn't choose that. I wouldn't choose that. What happens to some people? Who would dare to go to the Old Testament to get any morals? There are good positive messages for sure, but the weight of horror stories kind of makes them slightly lopsided. For me, I don't think God or the Bible have anything to do with morals. Some people made the ludicrous statement that if you don't believe in God, you might as well just go out killing and raping. This clearly is a statement made from complete and utter stupidity. Or people say that prisons are filled with atheists, not Christians. Not true at all. Let me give you some stats, guys. I've just read this and downloaded it. Let's debunk the myth. The Federal Bureau of Prisons released in April 2013 a survey of 218,167 prisoners. This is in the US. And reports of 0.07% of prisoners call themselves atheists. Not 7%, not even 0.7%, but 0.07 of American prisoners Atheists' open records request to the Federal Bureau of Prisons proves that even a smaller percentage of American prisoners, at 0.07%, identify as atheists, because 2.4% of the general population of Americans are atheists, according to 2012 Pew study. Atheists make up a disproportionately small percentage of prisoners. Pew shows 1 in 5 US adults identifies as non-religious, but doesn't necessarily use the term racist. And it's worth bringing up at this. Atheists are not a group of people like Christians. To everyone who's listening tonight or watching, you're an atheist to every other religion apart from the one that you believe in. Everyone is atheist. If you're a believer in God or the Bible but no other gods, you're an atheist to them. That goes a long way to debunk the myth that a person can't be good without God. Atheists have their own moral compass that doesn't involve a holy book. So wrote a gentleman by the name of Hemant Mehta. He wrote that. I was a good person with high morals before I became a Christian. I was the same when I was a Christian with zero changes, and now I'm no longer a Christian. I still have exactly the same morals. The antithesis of that is the people I used to know who flew the flag of Christianity but had the morals equivalent to that of a squashed snail. That's my 2 bobs worth on that. Let's move on from that. Can you, Luke, get your morals, and do you need to get your morals from the Bible? Certainly the New Testament's a hell of a lot more user-friendly and passive than the tyrannical God of the Old Testament.
No, for me, there's a few things here that I want to unpack briefly. It's very hard to have a conversation about today and where we are at with morality and what we would or what we wouldn't do, because we've been shaped by 2,000 years of a certain type of morality and development, and Christianity has been a significant component of that. Not even saying that you have to believe in God. I'm just saying that the impact that the event that birthed Christianity has had on the world is indisputable to atheists and theists alike. We know that this thing called Christianity had significant and profound impact on our daily life. And I think morality was certainly a big part of that. So one way, like it or not, one way or another, the conversation we have today and what we believe we would or wouldn't do has been tainted, has been shaped in some way from that. Now, the second part to that is, where does that come from? Does it come from the Bible? No, I don't think it does. I don't think you can use the Bible as a handbook for morality for all the obvious reasons that when you read it, you go, oh, yeah, like I mean, it's like, well, which bit of the Bible do we use? Yeah, it's like when people say biblical marriage. What does that mean? Like, are we talking about King David, who
doesn't it just mean I can have more than one wife?
Yeah, that's right. Who went through this and there's adultery and murdered this guy and stole his wife?
Sorry,
Is that
second thoughts. No, I don't want that.
No, yeah. Solomon, who had 500 wives.
Okay.
Like, what are we talking about here? It's the same with morality. Are there amazing things in the Bible? Absolutely. And there are things not just in the New Testament but in the Old Testament that were unbelievably radical and progressive for that time. Like some of the writings in there that made it in were given by prophets or different things, and they talk about a way to interact with each other and with the world around them that was just not done in those days. It was radically progressive. Was it the finished story? No, it didn't end there, but for them in that moment, it was hugely an advancement in morality, I guess. For me, when it comes to what do we take from that from a morality perspective in the New Testament or in the Old Testament, you can't look at the Bible. You have to look at Christ. And I say that as a Christian. I don't, for me, as someone who believes in God, as someone who believes in the Christian story, and as someone who claims to be a follower of Jesus, I I use the character of Jesus as that's the marker for me for morality. And you will find that's different. That stands in stark contrast to other bits that you see in the Bible. And that's why Jesus goes around saying, you've heard it said this, but I say this. It's different to the how some people have commented on that even later on in the epistles and things in the New Testament, where they have expounded on what they think was going on. But either way, you look at that, and I think that radical, absolutely radical, groundbreaking way of living that was in stark contrast to the way of society around them. For me, that is, that's the start of a brand new kind of living, a brand new type of being in the world, and obviously that comes from that a different way of viewing others, of seeing people and humans in a different way, with a I guess a divine worth that fundamentally changed how we interact with one another, particularly once obviously Christianity kind of took off, which I'm not a fan of Constantine and that sort of stuff, but it did have a significant impact from that. Has the church got it wrong? Absolutely, in a million different ways since then. But you cannot shake that initial event. That's
I'd love to, and we'll talk about this another time, or maybe tonight if we get back to it. But just when you were talking then, Luke, about the Old Testament, I thought, what was the point? What was the purpose of the Old Testament? If God knew that Jesus was going to become who Jesus was in the New Testament, why would he bother with the 10 Commandments? Because then people could have lived off the character of Jesus, as you admire and see that's where you get your morals, or your path to life is looking at the character of Jesus. And as a man, and whoever he was, if he was the Son of God or whatever, who can not admire what he did historically? Who can not admire that? But I'm just wondering, what was the point of the Old Testament? What was the point of showing the world how horrendous life could be under the rule of a God? It's great, but I might come back to that at another point. But I just want to go to some messages that have come through from Fenton again, just acknowledging what we're talking about, the good outside of God, a thing he adheres to, or does he fabricate the good? That was what we're talking about, the paradox. And Greg has said we all have a natural inbuilt moral compass except for psychopaths and sociopaths, and that's pretty much what I said, and I concur. I don't think anyone could disagree with this. And this one, if Christianity had never existed, we would still know right from wrong. Yes, I believe that 100%. There are people living in isolation who maybe it's a stretch to say it now in 2024, but certainly in days gone by, there were people on islands around the world who were beautiful, loving, caring, wonderful people who had never come across the whole religion thing. So yeah, I don't think Christianity could make any claim for teaching us right from wrong. I think that it's inbuilt, and natural selection has made sure that that's why they are sociopaths and psychopaths, and all the Christianity in the world is not going to get rid of nutbags who just decide to fly off the handle and do what they do. So good point, Greg. I agree. Gentlemen, what do you think about that statement? If Christianity had never existed, we would still know right from wrong.
Oh, absolutely true. The existence of all the other religions sort of proves that straight away. And look, when it comes to psychopaths and sociopaths, I agree, but they are such a tiny percentage of our population that it's almost not worth thinking about, because you can probably count the ones who have done the really, really bad stuff. I mean, Hitler was clearly one. Pol Pot, Martin Bryant. There's probably, I don't know, maybe 20 in history that I can really think of that were true psychopaths that managed to get themselves into positions of power.
Yeah, but it's a good way to be able to point to the extreme of what can happen. And as Sam Harris said, these Martin Bryant, he didn't choose to be a psychopath and kill all of those people. He didn't wake up one day and go, you know what? I felt like a normal person yesterday. Today, I feel like killing people. Something happens. There's a transition between an innocent child being born, and often you can trace back to degrees of abuse and neglect or stuff like that. But there are so many people who Hitler one day was a beautiful little boy, and something happened, and he turned into the most heinous human being you could possibly ever imagine. What happened?
I do agree to an extent, Peter, that they don't, and I've got a lot of sympathy for everyone. I really do. I try to understand that everybody has their own way, but
Yep.
when you decide to pick up a gun and shoot someone, you've still made a choice, regardless of what's going on in your head and the trauma and tragedy around you. That's still a choice you're making, and you have to understand the implications and the repercussions. And you can be dealt with by the legal system, the justice system. They'll sort you out, but ultimately, it still comes back to the fact that if you've made it to adulthood, you know right from wrong.
I think with psychopaths and sociopaths, it's I could be wrong. I'm not I'm not an expert on this, but I think there's a huge factor of it being you're born with it. I don't think it's necessarily a traumatic event in childhood. That may contribute to it, but and the issue with psychopaths and sociopaths isn't necessarily a lack of a moral compass. It's a lack of empathy, that they do not feel and cannot feel empathy. So we're talking about there's a physiological, neurological issue there that and they don't all end up killers. In fact, I remember reading something that said there's a surprisingly large number, percentage-wise, of CEOs and major senior executives
because that's what it takes to get there.
Correct. That may be sociopaths, because to get there, you have to be pretty ruthless, right? And empathy certainly gets in the way of so that does make sense. But in saying that, maybe you add in some significant childhood trauma, and maybe that is how you deviate towards the less friendly version of
sort
that.
Of predisposed towards it.
It's sort of a cocktail.
But even so, it's ultimately still a choice. So when it comes to punishment for doing something bad, it's not an excuse to say, well, I've been diagnosed as being a psychopath. Well, that's a diagnosis. It's not an excuse.
100%.
But what I'm talking about with the choice thing, where it's not a choice, is that transition to when they become a psychopath. Like they weren't born. And Luke, I know what you're saying. It may be something hereditary, maybe something inherent. I don't know. But there's a point where they're suddenly, almost, they become someone who wants to do horrendous things. Whereas before, that wasn't on their radar either. They might have had a moral compass, but and say, Luke, empathy is not a part of their DNA, as it were. There must be a point where it happens. You don't wake up one day wanting to kill people and then choose. You can choose to do it, but you didn't choose for that to happen to you. To a degree, you're innocent of something just coming into your being, whether it was we were born that way or whether somewhere along the line you changed and you became that person without your choice and without your knowledge and without your hearsay.
How's this for another thought experiment? So we talk about how killing people is wrong, and yet some countries, the government does it as a result of punishing you. So they have the death penalty. Is that wrong? In that country, it's an accepted thing? Is it wrong? And I'll take it a bit further. So let's say that you find yourself with a gun and it has a lot of bullets in it, and you happen to know that just down the road there's a meeting of the local pedophile group. Now, if you went down there based on your morality and decided to shoot everybody in that meeting, is that wrong?
According to who?
What they've done and are going to do to children.
Yep.
If you were to take them all out,
you'd be a hero.
Yeah, and this is where you start talking about morality. It's like, where do we draw the line? Who gets to make the decision?
Yeah, and look, that's an easy one when you believe in a God, because that's, you can just say, well, then it's wrong, it's wrong, it's wrong, it's wrong, it's never right. From a humanistic perspective, you'd be a hero for some if
That's
you
not how the
did that.
government would treat you, though.
No, you'd still be treated as a normal criminal and be jailed for the rest of your life if you killed a whole bunch of pedophiles, because you're killing people regardless of what they are. They're still human beings, and everyone is given the right, apparently under God, to have, the legal process to decide what happens to you. Yeah, that's a tricky one, because yes, I know what you're saying, because then our morality changes over to, yeah, damn straight, I don't give a shit about that. I'm glad he did it.
And
Hang
you
on a
watch
minute.
the amount of movies where that's
Yeah.
like the central theme of the movie, and we cheer on the
Yes.
citizen, the Avenger,
Yeah.
the guy that goes and equalizes everyone. If you've done something wrong, you should be scared of this guy because he's coming for you.
Yeah.
It's like Jesus with a machine gun.
And some churches paint Jesus in that way, because there's something
Right.
innately,
Yes.
which is a total misrepresentation. There is something innately within us that is violent in nature, and there is,
Yes.
and I'm not talking original sin. I don't subscribe to that
No.
doctrine of original sin. What I'm talking about is, there is something fundamentally within us, and the French anthropologist René Girard has the most exquisite work on this. And I've studied it a fair bit. The idea being that there's society and even religion in some aspects is built on this idea of violence, basically, between us. And I won't go into the weeds with it, but one of the things that for me is, I think, from a morality perspective, is radical and revolutionary with the message of Jesus, is it's utterly non-violent. Now, I know there are doctrines and there are theologies that don't take stock of that actually turn it violent. But it's not. Then that's not correct. His message is utterly non-violent. The God that he reveals is utterly non-violent.
Well, hang
which
on.
changes.
What happens if you're turning a table upside down? That's pretty violent.
Yeah. Well, even in that situation, that was a prophetic sort of. It was a prophetic display. It was echoing a whole bunch of stuff, and even it says I've heard people talk about that. He drove a whip. He uses the whip to get the animals out. He doesn't touch another human being. And when you look at what he was subjected to, there is no retribution. There is no. But the reason for me that is so radical, the reason that the non-violent nature, and look at his teachings, turn the other cheek, don't. He's not even saying don't go out looking for trouble. He's saying when someone is violent towards you, break the cycle by totally taking it and not actually reacting, right? And what I'm saying, the reason that that's so radical is because there is something within us that is violent. There is something that we will define our morality on, that sort of stuff. Now, we can make it sound noble, like the idea that we're going to go take out a bunch of pedophiles, or even that thought experiment. If you could go and you could kill Hitler as a baby, is that the greater thing to do? And it always becomes about the greater good, which is, again, something that humanity has always done. It's always been about for the tribe's greater good, and we'll scapegoat and we'll find something, we'll channel our violence into a scapegoat, and it releases it for a short moment of time until it comes back up again and we have to redo this thing. That's what the cross does. It subverts all of that. And that's why this was fundamentally different, because you have to now look and treat other people in a fundamentally different way. You cannot categorize or create a hierarchy of human worth and human value if there is the great equalizer of everyone being the same. That does change things. And then if you remove any aspect of violence from that, even in self-defense, then that has a cataclysmic effect of breaking that cycle. Is it completely broken? No. Look at the world. There's plenty of violence. But that's why I think the message is still very radical. For me, anyway.
Look, I understand, avoiding violence where possible. Even in your jiu-jitsu classes, they say, here are the rules for fighting. If you're on the street and somebody comes at you, number one, the best way to deal with this is to run as fast as you can. because if you can avoid the confrontation in the first place, that's the best
Mm.
way. But if I'm there with my family and we're being confronted on the street, I can't run away because I have to protect them. And if there's going to be violence perpetrated on my family, I can't turn the other cheek. I'm going to get involved. And that's another conundrum because you don't want to. And if you end up hurting someone really, really badly, you can then be in bigger trouble than the people who initiated it in the first place. You see that with home invasions. You know,
Yeah.
somebody breaks into the house middle of the night. It's dark. You can't tell what their intentions are or what weapons they're carrying. So you whack them one with a baseball bat, accidentally kill them because you didn't mean to. You can still be put away for that. That terrifies me.
Yeah.
And this is the thing.
It's tricky.
I think for me, it's when the rubber hits the road and it's your family. I don't know how I'd react. You know, I'm a pacifist. I fully am undoubtedly sold out to the idea of unequivocal nonviolence. But put in that position, I'm also human. They're like, you know, I also love my family, and so I like to think how I would act, but I don't know. It's a hard thing. What I do know is if you look at it from a wider like a sociological problem, like a wider sort of position, what this does is it is designed to get rid of eye for an eye, because eye for an eye sounds good. And that's in the Old Testament. That's where we get eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. That's the Old Testament. That was the teaching in it, right? Again, another way that we kind of you see this progression, because we like to think it's eye for an eye, but it never is. Look at Taken, right? And we love it. It's a great movie. His daughter gets stolen, so he kills like 900 people to get her back, right? And I get it, and I love it. It's entertainment and all that sort of stuff. And he's the hero, and you root for that. But again, it's not eye for an eye. It never is. But then what happens? The retaliation, it's more, and then it's more, and we end up, and we see this in warfare, we see this in relationships, we see this all throughout humanity, and all it does
is about as well. I mean,
what's that?
In our justice system. So you've done something wrong, you get taken to court, the judge passes a sentence on you that might, you know, okay, it might just be being put away for a certain amount of time. But while you're in prison, there's certain tasks you're going to have to do against your will and that kind of thing. And it's almost like the idea of punishment is a very older Christian way of looking at things, a very almost Victorian way of looking at things, you know,
which is crazy.
Wrong, you're going to be punished and you're going to jail, not just to protect society from you, but as a form of punishment. And again, we talked about this last week. I don't know that punishment is as effective as a carrot and a stick.
It's not. It's not. Science has proven that it's not. Now, I'm not saying release everyone from jails. I'm not even saying I have a better solution to what to do with someone. And I'm not saying people don't belong to be just, but there's no focus on rehabilitation. It's a retributive justice, an understanding of justice as retribution, rather than an understanding of justice as restoration. And when we see God, the God that I study, that I know, that I follow, is always a God of restorative justice and not retributive justice. I mean, look at how you parent. Yeah, anyone who's a parent knows punishment is not effective, nowhere near as effective, nor is we don't want to just punish the child. We want them to learn. We want to restore them. We want them to grow. We want them to nurture. Now, that doesn't mean that they get away with everything and there is no punishment. There is no consequences for your actions. There has to be. But the goal has to be for them to overcome whatever it is that's causing this thing, and for them to not have that define them as a person, right? And it's the same sort of thing. It's harder when you've murdered 30 people. I don't know what you do with someone like that, right? But someone gets caught for dealing drugs, and and that we put them in jail for 40 years. And
you do what the British did, and you send them off to Australia.
Yeah, exactly.
I think the problem, listening to you guys, it's a fascinating discussion. I love it, and it kind of amplifies to me the issue of the battle between trying to live a life as a Christian, but knowing that we are an evolving species that had to fight to survive, had to fight other human beings for a period to survive, that had to kill in order to get food, and that was the men's sole right and responsibility was to be the aggressor. It's in our DNA. We are from aggressive people. Unfortunately, in 2024, we still have spillovers like that, like unequal payment systems for women and men, and the whole chauvinistic societies in which we live in around the world. But I think the basis of it is that you said something, Luke, which made my ears prick up, and that is you admitted that Jesus was fallible. And Luke and Jason caught you out to a degree by saying that, Jesus lost his shit and threw a table and went crazy. Very violent, very aggressive. Now, he either did that and everything else you said doesn't make sense, or he didn't do that. If he did that, then he is fallible. If he's fallible with that, what else could he be fallible of? He did lose his shit. You said he's a completely and utterly 100% non-violent human being. But there's proof in writing, if you want to believe it, that that's what he did. So is he fallible? And if he is, what does that mean to everything else you're saying you believe in the character of Jesus, if he's capable of doing something so violent? It doesn't fit in, does it? It doesn't fit in with and we have to take it on face value. We can't say, "Oh, it probably didn't happen. Someone shouldn't have written that."
No, it happened. Yeah, it happened. It's attested to in all of the Gospels, I believe.
But that's seen as a good thing. That's seen as a heroic thing. Jesus lost his shit and he threw a table over. You're guilty. He got pissed off with people.
Look, there's a couple of things here. But first of all, could Jesus experience anger? Absolutely. He was a human being. He's not walking around floating on a cloud. He was a actual human being with human knowledge and human emotions, every human emotion. Otherwise, none of it makes any sense, because what does it care? Because he's God. Like, we can't emulate that. It's his human nature. But in saying that, we're basing this on the assumption that he let his anger get the best of him. He lost his shit and he just started throwing stuff around and was in a violent
so he planned it.
Well, actually, it does actually hark back to the Old Testament. It is a prophetic display. I think it's from Joel. So there is actually a link there that is. I don't want to get stuck into Bible teacher mode, but suffice it to say, there was a prophetic display, which in that culture, prophetic thing wasn't just coming out of your mouth. Often it was an action. It was something designed to challenge something, right? And when he's doing that, it's in the midst of the fig tree stuff and the temple. He's actually challenging the religious hierarchy and what they had done to the temple. So when he's in there, it's actually a display designed to speak out against a system of oppression that was actually harming a whole heap of people, not just from a religious standpoint, but economically as well. So there's that. And it's worth pointing out that even in that display, at no point did he lay a finger on or harm any human being in there, the ones that were actually behind the table.
We don't know that.
Well, it's not written in there. If that's what we're going off, if we all we can base on is the account in the stories, right? So
the next time I'm out drinking and I flip a table over, I know what my excuse is going to be.
Yes, exactly. Do it.
Do what Jesus would do.
These prices are economic exploitation. No, but what I'm saying is there's more to it. It's not just simply a case of saying, well, he's not non-violent, then you have to throw that out. It's not the case.
But that's always an excuse put up by Christian people when they get sort of, confronted with there's no way out. Jesus is infallible. He's perfect. There's no violent. And then we talk about that. But and then instead of saying, okay, well, then maybe he is fallible. Maybe he did do something that was out of character. Maybe because if someone's writing about that incident and wants it to be accurate, then there's a reason to assume it's 100% correct. And I mean, you got to run out of excuses sooner or later.
Well, the Bible's also heavily edited as well, isn't it? And the stories change slightly with different words over the years, different interpretations.
dramatically changed over 1,500 years. I mean, it's
Yeah, maybe there was a word in there at some point, so it said, and then Jesus flipped over the table and said, "You bloody idiots." We don't know. They might have dropped that because that is not in keeping with the character of Jesus.
yeah, just I don't think they used the word bloody back then, mate, either, just quietly. But
But they do
Fin-
keep in a lot of things in there that are hard to reconcile as well. Which I'm mindful. I don't want to turn this into a Bible show, but there are that it's not so heavily edited so as to be easily reconcilable. But at the same time, you have to read it on the weight of it all. We can't cherry pick these things and say, well, that just undermines the whole idea.
The problem
just
is,
after
though,
9
Luke,
o'clock.
if we had some kind of science textbook and there were contradictions in there or internal inconsistencies, that book would be pilloried and it would be discounted
Absolutely.
by experts in the field. And they would say, we're not using this book anymore because there's too many things that are inaccurate and wrong in there. And yet, so many people still hold the Bible up as being the book with all of its many inconsistencies and some lessons which I'm not sure are the lessons that I want to be teaching my children.
I
Totally.
don't think
There's
there's
plenty
a
of
group of people as prolific as there are theologians around the world whose sole purpose is to try and interpret the Bible with no gain in clarity whatsoever. And every single pastor of every single church and every single religion in the world has their own interpretation of what they think it means. Now, the reason why they not only can but have to come up with their own interpretation is because it's not black and white. It is just full of interpretations. Now, why anyone, with all due respect to my learned friend, why anyone would want to invest in something so confusing and so what's the word?
Well, Peter, let me just say one thing about that. My Christian mate that I have these regular discussions with, very similar to the one that we're having right now, he's part of a group that don't have a church. They have a fellowship. They meet in each other's houses. They consider themselves to be the true Christians. And I'm not, this is not, taking the mickey out of him or anything else. It's just what he told me more recently. They believe the Bible is the true literal word of God and you follow everything in it. And if you don't, you're not a Christian.
Well, that is absolute.
I struggle with that because in every other way, he's a fantastic guy. I really enjoy his company. We have a great time doing things together. But when we sit down and have these conversations and he says, number one, Jace, you're going to hell. Number two, I'm going to heaven. And number three, the Bible is the literal word of God. And I said, why do you even hang out with me if you know I'm a sinner and it's not going to change anytime soon? Why would you hang out with me?
Look, delusion.
Ministry.
Delusion is a very, very common state of mind in a lot of Christian people. That he is delusional totally, and not only that, but he's actually got no understanding about friendship. And to tell you you're going to hell is a ridiculous, and I'm going to heaven. That is so typical. That is so typical,
Peter, I don't believe in it.
Yeah,
it makes no difference to me. I mean, it makes a difference to him, but I'm kind of like, that's a nice story.
It's so typical of the idiots that used to stand at the Hay Street Mall in the city and yell out, if you don't speak in tongues, you're going to hell. I mean, it is just full of just delusional nutbags who do nothing to help people.
These are the instances where religion, or Christianity at least, doesn't make them a better person.
Correct.
It's actually
it has nothing to do with it. Doesn't reflect the character of Jesus in the slightest. Just going to mention too, it's just gone 9 o'clock. Not that it matters to you where you are, where in the world, but if you want to jump in and make a comment or have a question for us, what do you think about morals? Where do you think they come from? Do you think we need the 10 commandments, which really can be just quite, dissolved down into one? Don't be a dick. We've already decided that. Fenton is on again. My biggest problem with the idea of following Jesus' behavior is that the different gospels depicted a different Jesus. We'll come back to that in a sec, Luke. You can deal with that. And also the secular historical analysis explains it best in that the early Christians were evolving and responding to other social movements. So Fenton's talking like a man who's obviously been there and perhaps is a latent Christian. Don't know, but I'm kind of guessing he seems quite learned in that area. Shall we just quickly, Luke, if you can, in a heartbeat, address the idea about following Jesus' behavior that the different Gospels depicted a different Jesus? And I know you know a fair bit about this, so
Yeah, no, look, it's not that they depicted a different Jesus. It's that their as authors, they had a different intention in presenting a different aspect of Jesus. So each of the four Gospels are unique. There's a lot that obviously line up, but then there are different things that aren't in there. Effectively, what it comes down to is the authors are trying to present their own perspective. Sometimes there's a theological agenda. Sometimes it's because they're trying to speak to a different audience, either the Jews or other Gentiles. And in doing that, they're going to present it from a different perspective, focusing on different things. And they're for different people, so I think if all of them lined up 1000%, you'd have to, there'd be all sorts of question marks about, well, is this a conspiracy to make this perfect? The fact that there are small indiscrepancies around, which day did this certain thing happen on, and which day was this? One gospel says it's a Friday, one gospel says that it happened on the Saturday. One said this happened first, and then the other said this. We also have to look at the fact that this is a first century biographical account, and they wrote differently to how we would write a biography today. So the chronology of certain things was less important than the actual theological point or agenda that they were trying to get across. So that's why you'll see a few little differences in things. Does that mean that these things didn't happen? No, it just means you've got four different accounts of it with different perspectives.
Do you think Jesus knew that he was God?
Oh, that's a great question. That's one that I'm wrestling with all the time. I think it's hard for us to actually know. There's a lot of theologians that would take a position one way or the other and so think that they're certain on it. I don't think we can be certain on it. For me, I believe he developed an awareness of it.
Because the thing is, if we look at the historical record, he grew up as an Essene Jew, which is a pretty conservative Jewish cult almost.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that the guy that developed Christianity was actually a very conservative Jewish person.
Well, I don't think he had any intention on creating Christianity. You couldn't even call him a Christian. It was
Peter did that, really, didn't he?
Yeah, effectively, yeah. The early church did. In fact, the term Christians was it was like a slur. It was almost that they were made fun of by being called that. And they kind of adopted it. But it's his awareness of his true nature. It's hard to tell. I think he developed it. I think at some point he realized it. But also, we have to remember the humanity of Jesus. I think we learn way more from the humanity of Jesus than we do the divinity of Jesus. I do believe he was fully man and fully God, but the story just loses a whole lot of power if you just go, well, here's God that comes down and is walking around and does some miracles and then dies, but there's no stake in it because he knows his guy is going to be resurrected, all this sort of stuff. It's the humanity in his actions that actually, that's why we're called to model it, not worship Jesus. We're called to model Jesus. I think the world is a better place when we model Jesus, less so when we just worship him. If we worship him, we end up insular, our own little communities that it's all fun and happy clappy and great. And I'm into that. I do that stuff, right? But that's it. It's just worship. And that's why you end up, it's just one day we get to go to heaven and we just get to do more of that just in a different place or whatever. It's like, no, if we model Jesus, if we emulate him, then it's regardless of what you believe, then that's when you're having an impact.
I think that's great, Luke. In marketing terms, I used to have a marketing company. It's called a single proposition. So an ad should contain one proposition. The one proposition that you've got that can't be argued against and simplifies the whole thing down is just the character of Christ. And ironically, he was chosen to be that because of who he was, and yet the church has just engulfed this massive confusion and just stuff that can't be proved. And the character of Jesus is probably one of the most historical characters that can be proven that existed. It's
Can
debate
you
about
see how you don't have to look at the spirituality side of things
no.
to,
He was a
to
man.
recognize those qualities?
Correct.
Totally.
So just have a church that just talks purely about the single proposition, and that is the character of Jesus. And going back to my daddy was right, love, and just keep it simple, stupid. Just that's a single proposition for the church, and yet no church that I've ever seen or heard of actually accentuates that and bases their whole thing. You every now and then I'm Fox and I'll switch around and see some of the televangelists and replays of what's the most famous guy who cried on stage because he'd been unfaithful to his wife.
Oh, was it Backer?
No, he did it as well. The
A lot of them do.
The biggest name. I can't think. His son now does it. He's no longer with us. Anyway, and it's like the stuff that they carry on. And I used to sit in church, listen, open up. Let's look at Romans 17 and let's break it down. And then next week it's another. And rarely was the actual character of Jesus and what he stood for the sole purpose of that meeting. It's like people need more stuff, so let's give them more stuff. No, just give it a single proposition. Jesus was the first, most popular, as it were. He's not the first person to talk about love and all of those things. He was just the one.
This is why you see those bumper stickers that are just WWJD.
Yes.
What would Jesus do?
Yeah.
And that makes complete sense to me as a secularist. I think that's great. Yeah. Follow the quality.
If the church actually did that, it'd be a different story. Yeah, and again, what would Jesus do? Well, you don't have to believe in Jesus to be able to do what he did. What he would do.
Mate, what we're trying to get at here,
it transcends that.
This is your opportunity, Luke. Get out there and create a church. And just that's all you talk about.
A non-spiritual church.
Non-spiritual church. In fact, if you talk in tongues, you're out the door. That's the end of story.
I've actually she should have done it on here, but I've just had a message come through from my wife. She says, kindness and good morals don't need a faith label. She was raised Roman Catholic, no longer a believer, but still embraces kindness and good morals.
Bang. There it is. Look, and most people we come across on a day-to-day basis are like that. They understand, do unto others what you want them to do to you. It's a simple principle. It works. You're not going to overcome the people out there who just go through life being miserable and being pains in the ass and being, cut you off in traffic. Don't wave when you give them, you can pull in front of me. I don't mind.
That's the worst sin.
Oh,
yeah.
Where's the wave?
You're welcome.
Yesterday, going down Crimea Street, and this woman pulled out in front of me, and I had to slam on my brakes, and I bit my horn because she scared the hell out of me. It's lucky I didn't hit her. And I pulled up alongside her, and her windows. Oh no, she's waving like this in the car. And I went, that's the signal of get stuffed, mate. You dickhead. Why did you bip your horn at me? And pulled up alongside me, and her window went down. I went, oh, am I going to look over at this? Okay, put my window down. I looked over, and she was crying, saying, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I did that to you." And I went, it's okay. It's only, she said, no, I pulled out in front of you and I didn't realize. I'm so sorry. I said, look, I'm so sorry.
Horrible man.
Don't you
Peter.
apologize to me. You should have bipped your horn again.
You should be punished.
She said, I'm going home to sleep. And I said, I'm going home to have a glass of wine and then go to sleep. Oh, you get it right most of the times, but the dear old soul, I felt so bad for her. But look, we all know lots of beautiful people. They're not always going to be that way. Just be kind and be nice. And that's a simple principle of life. And if Jesus was here right now, he would be saying exactly That's exactly what I've been talking about. What's wrong with you people?
Yeah.
Not in those words.
I've often wondered, guys, about this, and again, I'm being horribly blasphemous here, and I apologize in advance. But what if the technology had been different in Jesus's time? What if back then we'd had electricity, and instead of crucifying people, they used the electric chair? Does that mean that today lots of people would be wearing little electric chairs around their, like on their necklace and up on the wall? I sometimes wonder about these things.
I think
That's
we probably need to talk off air about
that is the most accurate description of what we're doing with the cross. You know what I mean? That people don't realize that this is not, like I've seen paintings on the internet of Jesus and he's wearing a cross around his neck, and you go, yeah, you've missed that one, mate. But that's exactly what it is. It's crazy. I think there's a beautiful picture in that to kind of turn something so horrific into a symbol of resurrection, of life, of goodness. That's cool in itself. But yeah, I love it.
I do find it still strange that the cross has been, almost, well, not almost, but pretty much glorified throughout history as a mechanism to kill someone, of which that was the standard kind of the way to hang up criminals and display them publicly and kill them. Jesus was slightly worse, right?
Yeah.
Although
we don't just hang them or shoot them or just chop their head off. No, we're going to leave them up there and let them die slowly. Dehydrate, bugs and animals attacking you. Making a mess of yourself the whole time.
Yeah.
That is
and even emotionally,
horrible.
psychologically, like you're naked, you're open for scorn and ridicule. They've done, there are studies now, historically looking back, there's a consensus that in all of history, the crucifixion was the most barbaric, the worst method of death.
You couldn't come up with a worse way. If you sat down,
because when you're splayed out like that, it's all of this section here that's taking the weight of your body.
Yeah.
That's
You'll
right.
get to the point where you just wouldn't be able to breathe anymore.
Yeah. Although I have heard that Jesus, in fact, wasn't nailed to a cross; it was tied. There's a bit of discrepancy about that, whether roped around, and there are depictions.
Why would the Romans have done it differently just for him?
No, they wouldn't have. It's just because there's been examples in the past of crucifixions where it was a widespread practice, and some would nail, some would do rope.
If you think about,
I think he was nailed.
If you think about it, a grown man that much weight, I would assume that if you stuck nails through a hand, it would just pull through. But the feet were on a support board.
That's right.
Because that can support your weight.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it would have been through here, and it's not the hands that held the weight; it was the feet and the legs, which was why. And if they took too long, they'd just go along and they'd break your legs. That's what they would do. They'd shatter their bones in their legs, so that they couldn't hold themselves up anymore, and then they suffocate, which they didn't need to do for Jesus.
Guys, when I want to go in my sleep, quietly in my sleep, not screaming and shouting like the rest of the people in my car.
Remind me to have a carpool with you, Jace.
He's been trying to get that one out all night.
Fenton's got one of the best comments ever. Check this out.
Now,
Metallica's Ride the Lightning is biblical music. I like that.
Stairway to Heaven, biblical music.
Good on you.
Probably better than most.
I think next gathering we should just we should not have a topic. We should just discuss, because one of the things which makes it interesting having Jason here, apart from his shit house dad jokes, is that you are in a space where we are not. you're the odd one out, as it were, which means that the questions and observations that you make are interesting, because even though I'm not a Christian now, I was for 25 years. So I was where these guys were, Luke and Rich. So it's a great dynamic. And you don't mind just being innocent and asking questions because you want to know the answers to them, which then flows into great discussions about
But I
things.
also know that I'm a blasphemer and a heretic and a heathen and a heresiarch. I know all of those things.
You'll fit right
But
in.
that's from the perspective of a believer.
Yes.
And a grouch and a grumpy old sod.
Yeah, well, I think most of us can lay claim to being grumpy. Although you're a hell of a lot younger than me, so you shouldn't be anywhere near as grumpy as I am.
I got so many lines that I'm not going to use. I want to stay
Go
friends.
on,
It's a high bar.
I want to hear them, all of them.
No, it's all right.
Anyway, backtracking a little bit. Thank you so much for your wonderful wife for her fantastic comments, because I concur. I mean, yeah, I love what she said, and it's so true. And the reality is, like everything else I have discovered separate from my life as a Christian, is that there is nothing that a Christian or a believer can achieve or feel or do or think or say that we can't replicate. And this is always my confusion. It should be something that the only way you can feel this is with God. Oh, hang on, I can do it by meditating. Okay, well, what about this? No, I can actually do that as well. And Christopher Hitchens went to his grave with a check, I think it was $10,000 or whatever, saying anyone that can replicate something as a believer that I can't as an atheist, tell me one thing. And no one could ever come up with it. And I think shouldn't it be unique? Shouldn't it be something about God that only you can experience, Luke, or you can only see or feel or whatever? Shouldn't it be something that the only way you can experience this is through God? But there isn't anything. Everyone can be kind. Everyone can be loving. Everyone can be generous. Everyone can be nice. And that to me tells me that there's something missing. There's no uniqueness to it.
I mean, I just keep thinking of Jesus saying at the end, right, after he's been resurrected, and he says, now go and make disciples in all the nations, and basically take what I've taught you and teach them, get them to emulate and model me. He doesn't say make them believe the same stuff. He doesn't say make them say a sinner's prayer. He doesn't say make sure that you guys are in the same denomination and that you guys have the exclusive truth, and then they'll get extra stuff that no one else is going to get. He just says, see these things that I've taught you, this radically new way of interacting with people around you, in particular those on the margins, those that are perceived as less than in this current society, particularly those people. Treat them with a love and a respect and an honor and a dignity that even whether you think they deserve it or not, treat it with them and see what happens to the world. That's effectively what he's saying. He says, go and do that. So for me, I'm talking to two guys that are like, you don't have to be a Christian. You don't have to believe in this stuff. You don't have to think the Bible is anything special in order to just live the way that Jesus sort of says to live. And I'm going, awesome. That's the, like, of course.
And what's the catch? What's the punchline then? Because everything you just said about what Jesus is saying he wants us to do, we're doing it. You're not doing anything in your life because you're a good, kind man that I'm doing. So why the whole church thing?
Where's the title? Can you see the title at the top of the screen that says, can you perform good deeds without God?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Am I pointing at it?
Yeah, yes. Roughly, yes.
Okay. Let's come back to that question. I want to say one thing about that question.
Mm-hmm.
If you're doing good deeds because you're a Christian and the good book tells you to do good deeds and do the right thing and behave yourself and be positive and all these things, put that there. That box is there. And now I come along and I'm a non-believer and I do good deeds and I do good things just because I want to. I'm not scared of punishment or retribution or anything
Yeah.
like that. No one's telling me to do anything like that. I'm not
Right.
doing it under the fear of punishment or the fear of God. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do based on natural principles of natural justice and what I would want people to do to me.
Karma. Yep.
Which one's the better
Awesome.
person?
Yeah,
Which
I
one's the
hear
better
you.
person? Doing it because you think you have to, or doing it because you want to, because you believe it's the right thing to do?
Oh,
Yep.
the
I
desire
hear
to
you.
do it out of love, not out of fear. Absolutely, 100%. I mean,
That
that's
has to be, because that will show through. Yeah, if you're doing it for a different reason, you're going to be having stupid conversations, with all due respect, to like your friend is having, saying, "Hey, you know, this is you're going to hell, I'm going to heaven. This is right," and you just go, "Hang on a minute. What's the motivation here? Is just ridiculous. This is crazy." What you're saying is, and I think the answer is yes. Can you perform good deeds without God? Absolutely. There's a wider discussion there around the development of morality and the impact of the church and Jesus, all this sort of stuff. But that question, can you perform good deeds without God? Well, yes, you can. People prove that every day, right? What you're saying, it reminds me, and I'll say, I know we're running short on time. I'll be very, very brief. But one of my favorite philosophers is a guy called Peter Rollins, and he tells a whole bunch of different parables. And one of the parables he tells is amazing. It's the story of, and it's a parable, it's a story of a group of Jesus' disciples who, after he dies on the cross on Friday, Saturday morning, they wake up, they're absolutely despondent. And so they leave. They're worried about the authorities. They're worried about all this sort of stuff. And so they go and they trek, and then they end up getting on a boat and they sail, and they end up on this island, ages away. And they set up a community there. And it's a Christian community in the sense of they dearly love Jesus, and they loved what he taught, and they put that into practice in their community, and they do all this sort of stuff. And they love their neighbor, and they turn the other cheek, and they do all this sort of stuff. And it's this amazing thing. And then, like 50 years later, these missionaries end up coming to their island and says, "Oh, don't you know? Like, he actually was resurrected, like the day after you left, and he was God," and all this sort of stuff. And they're all excited and happy. But the elder, the main leader, actually is quite sad. And one of the missionaries says, "Why are you upset? What's going on? This is good news. This is the best news you could possibly have hoped for." And he says, "Yes, but I'm just worried about what's going to happen, because we live this way now out of a reverence for the man that Jesus was and his teachings. And I'm worried that my children's children's children are going to be living this way because they know he was God, and they're worried about what that will mean for them or whatever." It's like the motivation is going to change. And
Yes.
and that's and like all parables, it's designed to wrestle with and to think about and to challenge yourself. And I love it. I think that's a beautiful picture that is exactly what you're saying. We have to examine that.
Yeah, I'll get back to Fenton because he's put another message. But just before, what came really clear to me then, Luke, and I don't disagree with what you're saying, but I was thinking about Jesus dying on the cross and being resurrected and stuff, and I don't understand why that's necessary to be a part of your life when you can just do it without it. Do you know what I mean? If there was some gain, let's take away the promise to heaven, strip it back. Let's say the promise to heaven doesn't exist. There's no advantage for you whatsoever to believe in the story of Jesus or the Bible or anything, because you're doing
in that case, it's like a self-help book, isn't it?
Yeah, well, you're doing exactly what we do. You're talking about love and compassion and stuff, and as your wife reiterated. So if you look at that, there's absolutely no advantage whatsoever in having a church and going to church and reading the Bible and doing all of that stuff like I did and you're doing. Because at the end of the day, the one thing that we think is most important after everything we've talked about tonight about morals is about love and care and kindness and compassion and empathy and all of those wonderful characteristics that we have as human beings.
So, Pete, you're saying that if we put the same time and energy that we're putting into church and learning about the Bible and all that kind of stuff, we put that same time and energy into actually doing good deeds, like running a charity or going out and doing stuff for people or finding an old person whose lawn needs mowing or something like that.
Yes.
Is that really
Yes.
what we should be doing? Do we need an organized church? I mean, I don't know that that's a thing.
Well,
No,
I mean,
well, we
they're not
don't.
mutually exclusive. In fact, they're supposed to be intrinsically linked. The problem is when we separate those from the other, as in we separate the good deeds from church, not the church from the good deeds. You can do
There
good
must
deeds
be-
without church.
There must be, in your mind, Luke, an advantage to your Christianity that we don't have, and I want to know what it is. You don't have to tell me. I'm not putting you on the
Yeah.
spot and saying, well, you should have to tell me. I'm just saying I want to know because I've been there. I spent 25 years in this, so I know what I'm talking about. I'm in both camps, and I can look and go, okay, I can figure it out. And to me, there's zero difference. There's no
it's not true, Pete.
purpose of gaining anything if you're in
Not
that
true.
camp and not in this
I've
one.
heard believers get free chocolate.
Oh,
We do.
well, okay.
Yeah, we do.
Then
It's a secret.
that's it.
They won't tell you.
No.
I shouldn't
And
even
more-
confirm that.
Oh, you confirmed it. Oh,
I can't
At Easter
confirm or
as
deny
well?
it.
At Easter? Is there more at Easter?
no, always.
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 Mhm.
All right,
That's what the
ladies and
cross-
gentlemen, this is the end
Go
of
to the
this podcast
supermarket,
and every
wearing a
podcast.
cross, chocolate's free.
And parking spots.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's it. I'm a convert.
So, they're two pretty big factors right there. Peter, I do have an answer for you, but I don't want to give it now at 9:38. But there is reasons. I do have reasons. Absolutely. I have to. I'd have to. That's what my faith is built on. But
Well,
I
yeah,
will. I definitely will come back
You
to that.
better have, because otherwise I'm going to, yeah.
I've got a week to figure it out.
Benton, at 9:31 his time. Oh, so he's obviously in our time zone, or is that just saying that's our time zone? No, that's all.
I like Fenton.
Best part of Hitchens' challenge is that also there are numerous atrocities that a theist can justify that an atheist cannot.
That's that external attribution stuff, isn't it?
Yeah. Don't even try the Mormon chocolate, says Fenton.
That's a valuable
says,
lesson.
what the hell is Mormon chocolate? It sounds disgusting. Does that
It
mean
does.
Mormon chocolate? I'm assuming you can have more than one. Boom, boom.
Oh,
Eh?
Jace is coming for you on the dad jokes.
He's coming for me.
Mate,
It's a very rapid race to the bottom, Pete.
my children remind me constantly that I'm the king of dad jokes. I
You're
haven't
on.
told very often. I haven't told very often on this podcast. It seemed too serious, but of course the introduction of Jason was always going to bring it down to a level that we weren't at before. And
It's a
You
good
asked
thing.
me to come on here, Pete. You knew what you were getting.
a special shout out before we go to our good friend John Lewis, who was just
Yes.
unceremoniously dumped from 6PR after 39 years.
29 years.
29 was it?
John,
John,
cutting exercise.
you're not listening to this, but it's worthwhile putting it out there, mate. My heart's broken to hear that about you. You're a gentleman. You're a lovely guy. I've worked with you before. To be unceremoniously dumped like that out of that is an absolute travesty. So, yeah. All right. So let's wrap it up. Fenton and Greg, thank you so much. For those of you who are listening, who we don't know that you're listening, we know you're out there. It's been fabulous. We're going to do it again next Wednesday, same time, same place. With or without a subject. I don't know who's back next week.
I want to see all of us.
Well, I'm
Imagine
just going
that.
to say, if Richard and Suresh are available, Jason, we're gonna expand this little screen into 5 entities. I mean,
Yeah,
I
but
don't
then
know
they
if the
have to
world's ready
become,
for it.
You know, an atheist, a pastor, a believer, a secular guy, and an Indian.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, we'll have to try and we'll rejig the name.
Yeah.
I'm
I
not
love
sure
that.
if
We
the world
should just keep getting longer and longer. Like a running joke.
is 75 people. Okay, here's the show. Here's the podcast. It's called. Yeah, no, look, it's been terrific. We will do it again next week. So wherever you are in the world, thank you so much for being a part of an atheist, a believer, and a pastor walk into a bar. It is a fantastic podcast. We're excited to be doing it. Thank you, gentlemen, so much. Catch
Thank
you
you.
next Wednesday. Hopefully, let's stick around and we'll talk off air, having a wine.
Look
Thanks
forward
very
to
much. Catch you guys. Night all.
Yeah.